This is Cents Per Mile, featuring Charles Gracie, Paul Gibson, and Josh Haynes. Everyone knows the trucking industry has issues, but most people are afraid to talk about it.
Someone's got to do it.
With loads of recruiting and marketing experience and backed by the largest driver audience in the world, we deliver carriers the driver perspective, find solutions, and help make sense make sense.
Thank you for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson.
Hey, I'm Josh Haynes, and I can grow a beard, and Charles can't. Charles, what are we talking about today?
Not that, but we are talking about the executive perspective on trucking. Where's it going? What's it done? And what problems are we going to find along the way?
And as a recruiter, you can find out what people at the top level actually think about the recruiting department and the role that it plays in the overall company. But before we get into all that, the usual stuff. So we're on iHeartRadio, Wreaths Across America Radio, iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, pretty much everywhere. So wherever you get your content, if you could like, subscribe, rate, depending on what you do on that platform, and that helps push us out a little bit further and get us some more traction.
Speaking of traction, you can also go to centspermilepodcast.com where you can suggest a topic to be a guest or even to become one of our great sponsors.
Sponsors? Who's our sponsor for the episode today, Charles?
We got Decker Truck Line. They're driven to be the best. Check them out at deckertruckline.com.
Also, if you're watching this here, coming up real soon is FreightWaves F3. It's the biggest freight festival in the industry. There's lots of crazy parties. There's an insane amount of things that you can learn, and we'll be there. And because you know somebody, you can actually scan this QR code right here, and you'll actually save money on your admission if you decide to go.
And it's the last week you can get that hefty discount. So hop on it. It is truly a great experience. Tons of content, great networking, and it's called a festival for a reason. I might not say that to your boss if you're trying to get it through, though.
All right. Well, it's time for the news. All right, so it's time for 10-2 News, where we go back over the last couple weeks and we check out some of the coolest, weirdest, most important stories from CDLLife. So today our first story is truckers point out risk from autonomous big rigs and hackable ELDs as feds eye ban on Chinese and Russian connected vehicle tech.
That's a mouthful.
Yeah, it is a mouthful. But I mean, the long and short of it is the idea that the government is actually looking into the idea that a lot of this electronic equipment that's going in on vehicles, whether or not with those parts coming from other countries, if those other countries would have some kind of access to it. And drivers are like, yeah, you guys are looking at ELDs. You should probably look at autonomous trucks.
Well, what's crazy is we're introducing a lot of tech into the industry, and it's good. There's a lot of things that the industry is going to benefit from this. But with that comes the exposure to the cybersecurity side. And I think it's important that people are looking at this early junction in trucking as we introduce more and more tech.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, a lot of people are like, oh, autonomous trucks are coming. They were saying it like a few years ago, and then they said, oh, no, now it's here, and then, oh, no, now it's here. And there's a couple on the road, but it's still testing. I do appreciate how long it's taken to make sure that we get it right when it does happen.
Well, what's interesting on this article is OIDA calls out the cybersecurity dangers for truckers, and they're always advocating for what's going to be best for not only the safety on the road for the drivers, but also for the overall experience. So I think all these necessary parties coming together and voicing their opinions early stages on this is going to be critical to the success of it within the industry.
Well, hopefully the autonomous truck turns out better than the cyber truck. But speaking of Cybertrucks, we do have a couple feel-good stories about truck parking. So Love's opens up 206 truck stops in Kansas and Mississippi. Then TA is also opening up 104 truck stops in West Virginia. And Love's is opening up, Pilot is opening up, it looks like in Laredo, 50 extra truck parking spots. So we went from not having enough to then having more, but then it became paid. And now these truck stops are actually going out and starting to actually get more spots for drivers. That's nice.
Well, and it's important in a time where that's been a top issue for drivers when you compare those two lists. What our carriers are worried about and what our drivers worried about. That's been one of the top ones, or at least on the page of the top ones to be presented as things that need to be addressed. You're seeing other private companies come in and enter the space and offer their paid parking solution. But it's nice to see the truck stops looking at this as an opportunity to expand parking and hopefully gain new business from it.
Yeah, I mean, because at the same time, the more spots you have, the more drivers show up, because they don't really have a lot of options, so they're going to be there, and it's almost like you have a captive audience for your products.
Yeah, and I think it's important that drivers pay attention to this because these companies, these fuel solutions that are going out there and adding these spots, it's a great option for a driver to park for free, but it's also a great time for you to support them, do business at those, get your fuel, get your showers, get your food, and support them, as that gives them the revenue to keep expanding these efforts. If all you're doing is parking there for free and you're not doing no business, it's hard for a business to sustain itself. So it's really important to look at both sides of this coin.
Well, I think with those stats that we did a couple episodes ago back in season 3, I think that we definitely had some data that showed that the majority of drivers do actually use like rewards programs, which means they have to spend money. So they are. So it's nice to actually see them get rewarded for spending money to get rewards.
Here's your free truck parking.
Dude, yeah, I wonder if somebody must have just had a lot of points. Maybe that's what happened. Anyway, so it is time to go behind the desk with Tenstreet.
All right, we're behind the desk with Tim Crawford over at Tenstreet. Tim, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks, Charles. I appreciate you being here.
We're talking about the executive perspective, and I couldn't think of a better person to tap into some of that knowledge you got going on over there.
Yeah, I appreciate it. We do what we can. It's interesting times, that's for sure.
Well, there's never a dull moment in trucking, but with all this talk about where's trucking been, where's it going, what's your views on this?
Yeah, it's really interesting. What we're seeing in the market is we're seeing drivers be really, really cautious about where they go. Most of our clients are seeing about 7-8% fewer applications this time, this month relative to this time last year. And it looks like drivers are staying longer than ever at the carriers they're at. And normally when miles are down, economy's in a tough spot, drivers are quicker to sort of look over the fence and think the grass is greener and try to find a better place, get onto a fleet with some better miles. And this time around, I think people are just hunkering down where they are. And I hear the word stability a lot. Like, we don't hear that things are getting a lot weaker. But I think everybody's, both on the carrier side and the driver side, is really, really cautious right now.
That checks out from a recruiting perspective. It is a different game than it's been historically. You're forming more relationships. You're spending more time nurturing that relationship. And they are very cautious because they've been roped to dope so many times, and the grass isn't always greener, and they're catching on to that.
That's exactly right. But that said, right, what's interesting is we see the average driver in the market in some form or fashion still about every 4 months on average. We see drivers who are at least testing the waters. So I think there's a lot of pent up sort of interest, but people are being really cautious about going all the way and making moves.
Well, that all checks out, and that's some good stats. And I appreciate you taking time to come on and share them with our guest.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Have a good one.
All right, so it's time for our main topic, Make Sense, where we try to make sense. And today's topic, with the executive perspective and what that looks like from the top down in the trucking industry, we thought it would be great to bring our guests on. Who is that, Charles?
We have John Larkin. He's the strategic advisor for Clarendon Capital and the senior partner at Venture 53. Welcome to the show, John.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, save that until the end because you don't know how you feel until after the end of the interview with us. But we're talking about the executive perspective, and we bring a lot of different perspectives to the forefront on cents per mile. I couldn't think of a better one for this than yourself. So, I'm hoping that we have a really good, candid conversation here.
I'm not bashful, so fire away if you have questions.
I gotcha. So let's talk about the alignment of company strategy. How do you see the recruiting function supporting the company's strategic objectives in this market?
Well, it's interesting because I've been doing a little bit of work the last week or so, trying to bone up on the so-called truck driver shortage, which may actually be a driver turnover issue, which may actually be a driver pay issue. There's a lot of issues wrapped up in the driver, uh, issue, but recruiting is certainly a difficult topic, and there are a lot of sources you can go to identify leads, and the question is, how well refined is that list? If you are looking for 10 flatbed drivers in Billings, Montana, and the agency or the lead provider gives you 10 drayage drivers in Miami who have no interest in being a flatbed driver in Billings, Montana, it's not going to help you very much, right? So the trick is to separate the wheat from the chaff and deliver leads to carriers that are relevant, qualified people that have the appropriate level of experience, that have a CDL, that haven't hopped from job to job, that maybe have some experience in the flatbed arena in the upper Midwest and would be willing to haul flatbed freight in Montana. And if you have a large database of drivers, it should be granular enough that you can sift through all that and find the people that meet the criteria that you're establishing for that particular search.
So that leads into the next one, where in what ways should recruiting be adapted to the business priorities, and how should they look to evolve over the next couple of years?
Well, driver recruiting can be an internal function within a trucking company. It can be outsourced to somebody like, guess who? Hot Seat Services.
Nice plug.
I like to plug companies that I have respect for, but it's a function that is quite tricky, and I've heard over the years that sometimes people will be able to generate one driver per day, maybe two drivers per day, maybe if they're really good, three drivers per day, sitting in a recruiting seat working 8 hours a day. That seems hard to imagine, but it has to do with the fact that the criteria for selecting a driver keeps getting more and more constricting, more and more specific, and there are many people that just don't fit the criteria set, so they sort of fall out of the process. And then once you've convinced somebody to come to the onboarding session next Monday, question is, how do you convince them to stay through the 3-day onboarding session and then actually get into the seats so they can start generating some revenue while you're paying them?
Especially if they're watching all those Dan Baker videos.
What type of videos?
The Dan Baker videos that most drivers have seen probably 13 to 20 times.
From Val Verde, Texas.
They're great videos until you've seen them about 20 times. And then you got to keep that person's attention during the entire onboarding process, and it's a struggle.
It's a real struggle. So, recruiting is it's a funnel. You start out with all these leads. Hopefully they're very specialized leads that allows the recruiter not to waste his time separating the people that have no chance of coming to work for this company and those that have a good chance of coming to work for the company, and focus his or her efforts on trying to convince those people that there's an opportunity for them to upgrade their lifestyle, perhaps earn a little bit more money, maybe engage with a company that understands the importance of drivers, so that they feel like the valued members of the organization that they are. I mean, without drivers, you have nothing in a trucking company, right? They're the critical mass that makes it all work.
Well, that's exactly right. And you see a lot of companies out there where it's meat in the seat. And then you see other ones where they take their time, make sure they find the right people that match their culture, which leads into our next subject that we're going to kind of dive into, which is how culture and values fit into the future of recruiting. So with your experience, I think this is going to be a very useful tidbit for our listeners. But how would you like to see the recruiting process reflect companies' core values?
Well, there has to be an alignment between the core values and the message that the recruiter is delivering to the recruit, right? If the recruiter delivers a really positive, really juicy message saying this is going to be the grandest job of all time, you're going to love every minute of it, the driver comes in and finds out it's just as bad or worse than the company that he worked for previously, he's not going to stay very long, right? So if the culture suggests that you treat drivers like the valuable resources that they are, and that message is conveyed from the recruiter to the recruit comes on board and finds that the company actually does care and the company actually operates the way the recruiter said it operates, then I think you've got a shot of holding on to that person for a long time. But when there's a disconnect between expectations and reality, the driver's not going to stick around very long. He's got plenty of other opportunities. She has plenty of other opportunities elsewhere.
Well, and that's exactly what we see on a day to day. It's no secret what I do is recruiting. And in that, we see a lot of times people put this top 10% of the pay in their ads. They put this class A experience out there. And then the driver gets to orientation and it's lesser than that. And that's just stage one of the disappointment. Then they get their miles and it's not quite adding up. And then that's kind of the next straw that helps break the camel's back. So you see a couple of these. It might not be one particular straw. It's accumulation of those straws breaking the camel's back. But eventually they leave. And we're starting to see that happen more and more and quicker in the process. So I think it's really important that people incorporate the real culture, not just what you want to present on social media.
Right. So that requires training of recruiters. The recruiters really have to understand that they need to be truthful in delivering the message. And then it's up to the rest of the organization to deliver the message that's consistent with the culture and to operate the company consistent with the company's stated culture. Otherwise, you end up with C- organization and turnover that's really difficult to deal with.
So with all that experience that you have under your belt, do you see companies having with the new work-life balance and the different mentality in the workforce, do you see them having to combat this on the forefront rather than be more reactive like they have been historically?
Yeah, there's a fine line. You and I are actually talking a little bit about this earlier in a different discussion. But right now it's difficult to find people who are willing to really put in the hours to do the job the way the job needs to be done. And that's true if you're working in the office or if you're driving a truck. People expect this ability to have flexible work hours, to work some from home, to be able to see all their kids' sporting events. That's just not reality, especially in the world of trucking, which is a 24/7, 365 kind of an operation. You're going to have to make some sacrifices in order to be a good employee of a trucking company. And especially, you're going to have to make sacrifices to be a really good driver. There's no question about it.
Well, and I think that's important that people have that mentality walking in, like decide what's important to you. If it's being home for all those events, if it's making all the holidays, if it's being home every weekend, then it comes at a sacrifice. And that's usually going to be the financial one. Or, hey, am I going to roll up my sleeves, get out there, make as much as I can, and then turn that dial back when I hit a certain goal? And I think that's on an individual basis. And people fail to have those discussions with their significant others or themselves.
Yeah, and the other thing that we talked about is that the entry level position in trucking is usually the long haul, irregular route truckload business, right? Which is the most difficult lifestyle. It's the most challenging job of all, right? Because you never know where you're going to be tomorrow. You never know where you're going to be dispatched the day after that. You never know when you're going to get home. It creates a lot of pressure on your personal life, your family life, and if companies would lay out a career path for their drivers and say, look, if you can just gut it out for 9 or 12 months in this irregular route job, we'll, if you do a good job, we'll rotate you in maybe to a dedicated fleet job, which is much more predictable, much more regular, allows you to get home on a more frequent basis. And then maybe if you do well there, we could move you into a lease purchase owner operator program where you could be essentially running your own business. And then if you really do well there, you could become a fleet operator and have excuse me, I'm losing my voice, 5 or 10 trucks in your fleet, basically running your own small business. I don't think trucking companies do a very good job of laying out a potential career path for the most highly motivated people who are going to be your best employees. Okay.
You want to give them options to retain them. And if they're really driven, they're going to be looking for that path. So if you fail to lay out that path, that probably leads to some turnover on people you really don't want to leave.
They're going to find that career path somewhere else. Either they'll leave the trucking industry altogether and go work in a warehouse, driving a forklift truck maybe. That way they can get home every day if they so desire. But if you just say, okay, you're going to run to the West Coast continuously for the next 10 years, that's a tough nut to crack for most Americans these days. They aren't tough enough to endure that. Many of them. There are some that have the mindset to take on that challenge, but not many. Fewer and fewer every day.
People's mindsets have shifted over time. And that kind of leads me into my next question with things evolving, and trucking's always evolving. Some people argue that it's behind other things, but it's still moving forward. How do you view the relationship between effective recruiting efforts and a company's performance outcomes looking maybe next year? Because when I started this, it was pick up the phone and you make hires. Now it's a lot of recruiters are working almost like auto dialers.
Yeah, if you can't bring high quality people into your organization, keep your turnover at a reasonable targeted level, keep your accident incidence and severity at a manageable level, deliver the freight within the shippers and the receivers' specified delivery windows. If you can't perform consistently, which is very difficult to do if the turnover rate is 200 or 300%, you're not going to be able to charge a rate that enables you to continue to earn a profit, to reinvest in your equipment, and create something of value with your company. So it's really critical that you have recruiters who understand exactly the type of person that you're looking to recruit, and they focus all their efforts on men and women who fit those criteria.
So that kind of reminds me of a really weird conundrum that I ran into one time, talking to an executive at a trucking company. Um, it was sort of interesting because obviously turnover is an issue with drivers, and pay is an issue, which is the main one that I like to push. But I was talking to an executive, and essentially they had a $30,000 a month marketing budget for recruiting, and then they still had a huge turnover problem. So I was like, what if you raised your pay? Would you think that would help with turnover? And obviously there's a business element to that. And his response was, if I upped my pay by 1 cent, it would cost me millions. So the couple hundred that I spent on marketing and dealing with the turnover and just churning that out is cheaper. And to maintain retention because of pay, I'd have to raise it at least 5 cents. Obviously, that's a rock and a hard place. Do you have an opinion on the best way to try to go about that?
Yeah, there's a economic trade-off that you're describing, which basically says that because shippers are only willing to pay so much per mile for my transportation services, I can only afford to pay my drivers so much. And because of that limit on driver pay, not everyone is going to be satisfied over a long period of time. I can't take the pay up fast enough to really hold on to all my drivers. Some will stay, but some are going to turn over. So there's like this break-even point at which you're happy to spend more money on recruiting and tolerate, a 100% turnover than to take driver pay up dramatically and then see your turnover maybe drop to 30 or 40 or 50%. JB Hunt actually, about 20 or 25 years ago, analyzed this situation like the one you described and decided to take their driver pay way up, okay, reduce their spending on recruiting. And what they found was that the shippers didn't care. They weren't willing to pay more, margins squeezed, shareholders got upset. So they had to scrap that program and go back to more of a market-based pay program. There's no truckload carrier in the industry who is big enough to really be a leader in taking driver pay up dramatically. Everybody's pay is sort of in the same zip code. Everybody has the same bonuses for fuel efficiency, safety, on-time delivery, productivity, etc. There's not a whole lot incremental you can do other than to work on your culture, which is the one sort of non-economic way to reduce turnover, which has a dramatic economic impact on your bottom line.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the most successful recruiting departments and companies that have reinforced the recruiting's initiatives have been ones that have aligned the culture from what they're presenting in the marketing to what's being presented in the recruiting phase to onboarding to the day-to-day. And I feel like a lot of people don't assign the value to that they should. It requires you to roll up your sleeves and do a little bit more work than just throw money at it, but it pays off in the long run. And when you're looking at things further down the road, it seems like the more sustainable route to go if you're a company and you're looking to hire people and keep them.
So if you have a room full of 50 recruiters at a big trucking company, to get all 50 of them to deliver the message the same way is a pretty big challenge, right? Some people are going to be great performers. They're going to deliver the message that's consistent with the culture, and other people are going to take, the easy road, hit the easy button, and just tell the driver recruits what they've been telling them all along. So there's got to be a management mechanism to make sure that the recruiters are doing the right job, and whether that's listening in on selective recruiting pitches and making sure that the message is being delivered consistently. And if it's not, then you have to call that recruiter off to the side and say, hey, look, we really need to change up your message here. Here's a suggested message that you use that's more consistent with our culture. But that's hard work, right? That's what managing a room full of people is all about. And not all companies do that well.
Yeah, one of the things that we've deployed here, because we work with so many different companies, is when a recruiter has submitted a driver for processing and that driver's been approved prior to confirming orientation, we have a recruiting manager also recap the offer and make sure everything's aligned, just for a better experience, not only for the driver, but for the carrier, because everyone wants to be happy. That's the goal in business. So if you can make both sides happy, you come out winning.
Yeah, no question about it.
So, John, you got some exciting stuff coming up as well. You're going to be at F3 with us. I apologize in advance because people have mixed feelings when cents per mile shows up.
It's going to be good times. Good times. Great times.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's bringing you to F3?
Well, first of all, I started out many years ago in the freight tech world. My first experience with freight tech was to be an advisor to FreightWaves. And this is back when FreightWaves was trying to develop a system to hedge spot rate volatility. Okay. And they actually developed the technology to do that, but they couldn't get enough volume in every lane, in every direction to make it work. So they kind of dropped that and moved into the sonar strategy, which is their full data product. And then they developed these events, which are now part of Firecrown and not part of Sonar. They've separated the two pieces. And the events have always been really professionally done, especially the one in Chattanooga, which is usually held in November. There's a ton of freight tech companies there. There are some shippers there. There are some carriers there. It's always good to catch up with people, meet new folks, learn about the latest technology that's happening in the industry. And this year, I was asked to talk a little bit about what's happening in the venture capital and private equity world. I think Craig Fuller is going to interview me. And then I'm also debating a gentleman from OIDA on the topic of, is there a driver shortage or is there not a driver shortage?
Which who is it?
I'm not sure. I'd have to dig into my notes to figure out who it is. I don't think it's Todd Spencer or one of the senior people. It's somebody who's probably analytically very deeply involved in understanding the driver situation. So I may get my lunch cleaned in the debate. I don't know. We'll wait and see how that all pans out. But it's a good time. It's a freight festival. There's a lot of good people there. FreightWaves does a nice job with the production, and Chattanooga is a fun town to be in. I really like Chattanooga. My son used to live there up until a couple of years ago.
Nice. Well, we're excited. We'll be there, so we'll definitely be in attendance to see that debate and that fireside chat with Craig. And thank you for sharing some of your insights and experience with our viewers on cents per mile.
It's been my pleasure. Even though the interview went in a little different direction than I thought when I started, that's okay. And we'll do this again sometime, hopefully.
We're excited to announce CDL Connect sessions, powered by CDLLife. 8 engaging webinars filled with insights and fresh strategies to transform how you connect with drivers. Join us Thursday, November 14th for our 6th session, Unlocking Recruiter Excellence, Strategies for Success, with Charles Gracie, President of Hot Seat Services. Discover how effective nurturing and strategic partnerships can elevate recruiters from dialers to closers, and understand the key traits that define a great recruiter. Click the link in the description to register and browse future sessions.
All right. Well, that was really interesting. I guess as a recruiter, it's kind of interesting to know how your boss's boss feels about what you do.
Yeah, the executive perspective is very unique, and it's different than what we see at the ground level. But I think that concludes our show. So thanks for tuning in to Cents Per Mile. I'm your host, Charles Gracie.
And I'm your co-host, Paul Gibson. See you next time.